shiur. The primary focus of the shiur, as mentioned when we publicized it, is going to be more practical and halachic in terms of just practically speaking how to run the Seder. I hope there'll be plenty of information in it for newbies who haven't had to run a Seder before in the past. And many of us find ourselves in the situation where we'll be running the Seder for the first time. And also hopefully lots of extra information for those who are old hands at the job and have run many Sedorim before. I'll also try and share some information and general Divrei Torah and thoughts on the Seder, so that hopefully one will also be enriched in terms of the Seder content itself. But the primary focus, as I say, will be on the halachic and practical purpose. As Simon mentioned, I'll speak and then for time, and then I'll stop and take questions. At that point, he'll unmute everyone, and then after that, I'll go back to speaking again, and that way there'll be a chance for questions every so often, but without Zoom interfering in our ability to sort of keep going. But before I start, I do just want to share some thoughts about Pesach, upcoming Yom Tov of Pesach, and really to ask a very basic question, which is the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, the halachas associated with remembering Mitzrayim are very central to the Torah. I mean, there's countless mitzvot that are connected to remembering Mitzrayim, from, of course, the whole of Pesach itself, the Seder, the mitzvahs associated with the Seder, Pesach cleaning, and everything associated with that, but actually so many other mitzvahs that we do throughout the rest of the year. Twice a day we say Shema, and beyond the first two sections of the Shema, which are to do with accepting God's authority over the world, we also have a mitzvah of mentioning Yetzias Mitzrayim, Tefillin, mezuzahs. So much of the Torah is built around the idea of Shabbos, Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim. Now, what's so central, what's so important about Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim? Now, part of the answer to the question is well known. This is clearly the central plank of our relationship to Hashem. This was the formative event in our formation as a people. This was the basis of our connection and our knowledge of Hashem, our relationship with Him, our understanding and clarity that He intervenes in history, that He cares about human beings, that He wants to have a connection with human beings, that He is capable of Nisim and Niflois, of the miraculous events of Yetzias Mitzrayim. So this is very important and very central in terms of our emunah and our bein Adam leChavero. However, what's often less remembered is that this is also the central plank of our bein Adam. Sorry, that this is a formative in our bein Adam leMokum, in our relationship to Hashem. What's often less remembered is that this is also a formative plank in our relationship between each other, being Adam leChavero, our interaction with other human beings, with other peoples, because there's something really remarkable that's going on in the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim that sometimes we forget. And every nation has its founding story, the sort of central story that we speak about ourselves as the people and define us as a nation. So for the English, maybe it's William the Conqueror, the Battle of Hastings, maybe it's the Magna Carta and the basis of our sort of human rights, maybe it's common law. These are the sort of central stories about what it means to be English. You know, when we ask ourselves, what's the central story about what it means to be a Jew? The answer is that we are ex-slaves, that we were formed out of slavery. That's the central story we tell about what it means to be a Jew. And when we ask ourselves, what am I? And I say I am a Jew, we mean by that I'm an ex-slave. We're not just nice middle-class people who are fortunate to live in leafy suburbs, but we are ex-slaves. And being an ex-slave means being someone who is needy, who is uneducated, who is unclean, doesn't have great standards of hygiene, is unable to cope, is vulnerable, is at the mercy of others. That's what it means to be a slave. And the definition of a Jew is an ex-slave. And that means as we walk through life and we see people who are sleeping rough on the street, as we see people who are homeless, as we see people who are alone, as we see people who aren't coping and aren't managing, as we see people who are the dropouts of society, we're meant to look at them, we're meant to say, these are our brothers and sisters. This is what it means to be a Jew. To be a Jew is someone who comes from that, and that's at the core of our identity, and that's what we're meant to remind ourselves of equally yearly, in the same way as we remind ourselves of the relationship to Hashem that comes from the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. We also remind ourselves of what sorts of people we are. And this is meant to have a radical and significant impact on our sense of self and how we define ourselves. The Torah says 30, 40 times throughout the Torah, V'ahavta besager, love the stranger, because we were once strangers in the lands of Egypt. We need to look after those who are alone, those who are poor, because we were once alone and poor in Mitzrayim. And this is, therefore, this is the founding story of us as a people. It's the plank, the pillar upon which is built our identity as Klal Yisrael with the relationship with Hashem. And this is also the central pillar, the central plank of our identity with other human beings, never to mistreat, never to look down on the stranger, because this is what we are at our core. And it's for this reason that the whole story of Yetzias Mitzrayim really makes sense. If Hashem merely wanted to take us out of Egypt, he could have done so with gone straight to Makas Bechuros, or perhaps even straight to Choshech, and just frozen the Egyptians, and out we could have walked. And the reason why the whole events take place is answered by Hashem. Really, Moshe asks Hashem this question directly right at the beginning of his mission, and he says, "Why are we going through this whole procedure? Why are we going through this rigmarole? Just force Paro to let us go, and that's it." And Moshe answers, Hashem answers, "V'yotu Mitzrayim kirni Hashem b'tosis yodi al Mitzrayim," in Shemos chapter 7, that the Egyptians should know that I am Hashem. Hashem cares about the whole world knowing that I am God. And Leman Tusape ba'ozni bincha, in order that we should be able to tell our children and our descendants after us, about the whole Egyptian story. So the purpose of Yetzias Mitzrayim is in order that we should be able to carry on talking about it, and through that build ourselves and build our connection with Hashem. And this is ultimately the reason why of course, we celebrate Yetzias Mitzrayim, Hashem who got us into the mess. He led us and let us get down to Egypt, also took us out of this. And we may be tempted to ask, if we were put in that situation by Hashem, why should we thank him for getting out of this? And the answer is because Mitzrayim is a kor habazel. It's a smelting pot. It's a furnace which creates us and built us into the people we are, and molded us in a formative manner into the nation. A kor habazel is a smelting pot. When one mines metals, they are mixed with stones and other contaminants, and then one melts them so the metal runs off clean and pure, and the stones and other dirt is left behind. And this is what Mitzrayim was for us. This was the formative experience of us becoming a Jewish people. We've had a lot of questions over the last few days about Tevilas Kalim. Normally we just casually can go to the Kalim mikveh when we have new utensils that we buy for Pesach, but at the moment we can't do that so easily. Now the concept behind Tevilas Kalim is one of gerus, is one of almost conversion, in the same way as a ger, a potential convert, gets dipped in the mikveh and through that enters into the covenant and becomes a member of the Jewish people. Similarly, when we buy a utensil and we now wish to use it in on our Jewish table, we recognize this is no mere physical object. This is something that's going to be used for a meal, and we wish to elevate it by dipping it in the mikveh. Now that's one way of dealing with Tevilas Kalim. However, if one's unable to tovel one's utensil, there's another solution, which is we can break it down into its component parts and remake it again back into a new utensil. And so through so doing, we've recreated it, dismantling it and recreating it. And in a sense, this is the dual way through which the Jewish people were built. As individuals, we can convert to Judaism through the Tevilas Kalim, but as a people, we were created through being dismantled in Egypt and rebuilt as a nation, and that's the experience of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Why did we need to be rebuilt as a nation? So that the founding of us, the essence of us, we should realize we are created and come into existence through our relationship with Hashem. We walk around with our awareness that we can only exist through the support of Hashem. We are aware that we are fundamentally vulnerable, and the foundation and basis of our existence is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is Hashem. And equally, we are aware of the implications of that, which is we need to look after those who are vulnerable and those who are alone. And in that, the two reasons merge into one. We were brought into existence in Egypt, and in so doing, we recognize that our existence is not something secure, it's not something firm, it's not something safe, it's not something that rests and can be maintained on itself. We don't exist with our own koyach, with our own strength, but only through the foundation of our relationship with Hashem and our corresponding chesed that reaches out of that. And it's hard and difficult to look at current affairs and know how to read them. it's hard and difficult to understand why we as a people, why the world and all its citizens, all humanity are going through these experiences at this time. And it's also doubly complicated by the fact that it's Pesach. Maybe if this was another time of year, we'd say, you know what, so we're in isolation, we can't go shopping, we can take things a little bit more easily, we'll manage, we'll cope. But this is a very hard time of year to be going through that. But I do think that many of the central themes of Pesach are connected with what we are going through. And I think central to the story of Pesach is ultimately that we humans are vulnerable, ultimately that we are in the hands of Hashem, and we sometimes forget that. That our relationship to ourselves can only be built on a relationship to Hashem, on the central tenets of Yetzias Mitzrayim, of Hashem's care for us, and that He is the foundation of our existence. And equally, that with that comes a basic responsibility. V'ahavtem es hager. We are ex-slaves, and our brothers and sisters are those who are vulnerable and needy. And this is the heart, the essence of Judaism. And this is why Yetzias Mitzrayim is so central. This is why we had to go through that Korah HaBazel, that painful smelting pot. This is why Yetzias Mitzrayim is our central story, the story of our founding. And it's why so many mitzvahs in the Torah, perhaps half the mitzvahs of the Torah, from Shabbos to Mezuzah to Tefillin to Pesach, are connected with Yetzias Mitzrayim. This is why it's something that's so central to us. Now, if we look at the Seder itself and think about the structure of the evening, which we're going to be working through the rest of this shiur, first of all, the word Seder. So the word Seder means order. And the reason the Seder was created and put into its current form initially from the Mishnah, and then fine-tuned and tweaked through the era of the Gemara and the Gaonim, so it took its current form sometime in the time of the Gaonim. We don't know the final editor of the Mishnah, but he was someone in the era of the Gaonim, core structure starting from the Mishnah. The reason why there's a concept of Seder is actually much like the reason why there's a concept of a Siddur. The reason we have a Siddur is an organized structure of Tefillah, because Tefillah is complicated. There's so much to do. We need to make sure we do it in order and in a set pattern. There's many mitzvahs being combined in the Siddur. There's Kriyas Shema and there's davening and other such things. And similarly, the Seder is quite simply a complicated evening. And the Seder is a handbook to get us through the evening. That's why the Gaonim designed it in that way, in order to be sure that we'll fulfill all the mitzvahs and all the halachas in the correct order and in the correct manner. And that's the essence of what a Seder is. So let's just pause for a few minutes and just think about what are the mitzvahs of the night. And we'll see very quickly how it explodes into exceptional complexity. Hence the need for a siddur, an order to take us through the mitzvahs. We have the core mitzvahs. There are two mitzvahs min HaTorah, which are from Torah law. That's the eating of the matzah and the eating of the mitzvah of Sipur, the telling of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Eating of the matzah is a pasuk in the Torah. In the times when we still had a carbon Pesach, then there would have also been min HaTorah, the mitzvah of eating the carbon Pesach and the mitzvah of Moror. Nowadays, we don't have the mitzvah of eating carbon Pesach, and the Moror is linked to the carbon Pesach, unlike matzah. Matzah is its own independent mitzvah, but Moror is only a mitzvah min HaTorah when it's eaten with carbon Pesach, and therefore the Moror and carbon Pesach are don't exist nowadays min HaTorah as far as Torah law is concerned, but we do have, as far as Torah law is concerned, the mitzvah of eating matzah and the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, of talking about Yetzias Mitzrayim at night, preferably to others, but equally to ourselves. If we're alone for the Seder, then reading through the Haggadah and the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim to ourselves is also fulfillment of that mitzvah. And then we have numerous, almost uncountable mitzvahs d'Rabbanon, rabbinic mitzvahs of the night. We have the mitzvahs of the 4 cups, which are designed around the structure of the Seder, 1 cup in Kaddish, 1 cup at the end of the Haggadah, 1 cup in Birchas Hamazon, and so on, but are also themselves a mitzvah derech chayus, a way of celebrating the freedom by having these 4 cups. We've got the mitzvah of eating moror, which is Rabbanon, and we already mentioned. And then around that mitzvah, there's the mitzvah of charoses, also a Rabbanon, according to one opinion in the Gemara, to dip the moror into the charoses. We have the mitzvah of Hallel, of concluding the Seder with saying Hallel. And then we have sub-details within the mitzvah. Matzah itself is broken up into eating the matzah, but then eating korach, the sandwich of Hillel, which we'll get to later, eating the afikoman after the meal, which is a commemoration of the carbon Pesach. And then there's other mitzvahs like karpas, which are part of derech chayus, that we dip a vegetable into salt water at the beginning of the meal, and so it goes on and on. And before we know it, there's so many mitzvahs on Seder night that we need to do, that it becomes very complicated to ensure that we're doing all the mitzvahs of the night, hence the structure of the Seder. But we also need to break it down further, because the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim itself has numerous halachas. And there's a famous analysis of Reb Chaim at Brisker, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, in which he talks about the unique mitzvahs associated with Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. And he points out that every day, twice a day, we mentioned this already, in Shema we have a mitzvah of Zeicher Yetzias Mitzrayim, remembering, mentioning Egypt, which we do so with a mere mention with one line. We mention it briefly at the end of Shema. However, the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim is to tell over the whole story. And this has many additional details to it. It has many additional elements to it. And this is part of the complication of performing a mitzvah. It has to be a sipur, it has to be a story. A story is expanded at length, it has detail, it has description. Part of the essence of a story is that it feels like reliving it. A good storyteller makes us relive it. And therefore, Chayv Adam Liros Esatzmo, Ki'ilu Yatzim Mitzrayim, a person has to see themselves as if they left Egypt. They have to relive the experience through the sipur. In addition, Maschil Begnus or Masayim B'Shvach, we have to begin the story from the negative and then conclude with the positive. And in that itself, there's a machlokus about how we fulfill that. How do we conclude with the negative? How do we begin with the negative and conclude with the positive? One opinion in the Gemara is the physical negative and the physical positive, avodim hayinu, moving into the miracles and the salvation and the redemption. And the second opinion is the spiritual negative and spiritual positive, the spiritual cause of going down to Egypt, which was mitchila ovda avodah zarah, that initially we were idol worshippers, and the spiritual outcome, which is that eventually we were given the Torah. We fulfill both models. We tell Yetzias Mitzrayim twice in the Haggadah. We first say avodim hayinu lefaro. We go through the physical telling of the story, and then we start the whole story again with mitchila ovda avodah zarah, and we tell the spiritual story by talking about the slavery that took place, talking about the spiritual contamination that led to Yetzias Mitzrayim, followed by the giving of the Torah, the spiritual redemption. So in the mitzvah Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim itself, there's complications. We have to make sure it's Sipur, Chayv Adam Liros Esatzmo, we have to see ourselves, we have to matchil begnut Masayim B'Shvach, we have to make sure that we begin in the negative and tell in the positive, and that self is broken down into two details. In addition, we have to do it derech she'ela or teshuvah. We have to ask ourselves questions and give ourselves answers. We have to tell it derech she'ela teshuvah. Why do we have to tell it derech she'ela teshuvah? Why is that the way Sipur has to be done? Well, probably for several reasons. First of all, because it's the best way to internalize it. It's the best way to make it part of ourselves and the best way to absorb ourselves in the story. But also possibly because derech she'ela teshuvah mimics the process of golus and geula. The essence of golus and geula, of exile and slavery, followed by redemption, is that of a question and an answer. At the time of slavery, the time of golus, we're puzzled, we're confused. Why are we going through this? Why are we having these difficult times? But the essence of geula isn't just a redemption in which going forward we're no longer affected, but it's also a redemption where we can look back and we can understand why we went through these experiences. We understand post-Yetzias Mitzrayim, this was necessary for us to be slaves, in order for us to relive, in order for us to learn the lessons of what it means to be a slave and emerge with our relationship with Hashem and with other human beings, as we've just explained. So that style of derech she'ela teshuvah, question and answer, is itself reliving the experience of slavery and suffering, followed by redemption and clarification. There's another detail in the halacha, that it has to be a sound and light show, it has to be experiential. When we normally do mitzvahs in the Torah, it's good that we understand the reasons for the mitzvahs, but it's not essential. The main thing is we do the mitzvah. However, with the three mitzvahs associated with the night of Seder, Pesach, Matzah, and Moror, Rabbi Gamliel explains that we have to understand the reason, not for the fulfillment of that mitzvah, but as part of the fulfillment of the Haggadah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. And we learn that out from the Pasuk, through these and because of these and association with these physical objects, Hashem took us out of Egypt. And therefore the story has to be told in connection with the real physical objects that we eat, the matzah and the maror and the korban Pesach. Hence the din of Rabbi Gamliel. So this is another additional detail in the mitzvah in how we do the sipur. In addition, since we relive the experience, we conclude with Hallel. If we just mention Mitzrayim, we don't need to conclude with Hallel. But when we relive the experience, we have to conclude with Hallel. Hence the mitzvah of saying Hallel on the night. So, says Reb Chaim, there's many halachas in Sippur itself. Unlike just mentioning Mitzrayim, which we do every day, when it comes to Sippur Yetzias Mitzrayim, we've got all these details. We have to begin with a negative and finish with a positive. We have to speak at length. We have to see ourselves as if we went out of Egypt. It has to be done question and answer. We have to say Ba'avor Zeh. We have to do it with the mitzvahs that are associated with it. We have to understand the reasons behind them, Ram and Gamliel. We have to conclude with Hallel and Hodah. And finally, we have to do it deriving it from the Pesukim in the Torah, which is why we go through these 4 Pesukim at length of Arami, Ovid, Ovi, etc. And we are Doresh, we draw out the story from the Pesukim in the Torah. So these are additional complications in how one fulfills the mitzvah. Now at this point, all of us must be panicking. How on earth are we going to cope with this? We've got the mitzvah of Kiddush. We've got the mitzvah of eating matzah. We've got the mitzvah of Sippur Yetzias Mitzrayim. We've got the mitzvah of Moror. We've got the mitzvah of Korban Pesach in the olden days. We've got the 4 cups. We've got Hallel. We've got Korach. We've got Afikomen. We've got Charosis. We've got Karpas. And then in Sippur, there's all these complications. Well, don't worry. That's why the Gaonim set up the Seder, the Haggadah, as the way of getting us through it. So this is the concept of what Haggadah is, what Seder is. This is why it's called the Seder, the order, because this is the way we can get through fulfilling all this complicated narrative, how we can get through fulfilling this complicated story and making sure that we do all the mitzvahs properly. So that is the idea of what the Seder is about and why there's a concept of a Seder. Okay, someone posted that they weren't able to hear. Is everyone now able to hear? Yeah, okay. I guess this was one of those silly questions. If you can't hear me, then you wouldn't know that I was asking you if you're able to hear, so I apologize for that. Okay, we go on. So let's just talk now about the practical running of the Seder, having discussed some ideas behind this. First of all, there are various preparations that need to be made in advance of the Seder. I would encourage everyone to use a Haggadah that has clear instructions and read this in advance. The shiur is really just a trigger for everyone doing as much preparation in advance for preparing one's own Divrei Torah and also being clear about how to run things. The Seder table should be set whilst it's still daytime, so one can start the Seder straight away at nightfall. We'll speak in a few moments about why the Seder has to be started only at nightfall. However, one wants to be able to start as soon as possible in order to get on with the mitzvahs. And the Seder should be laid with as nice and as pleasant utensils as possible. It's part of the derech chayus that it should be set up in a beautiful and pleasant manner. To the best of one's abilities, especially this difficult year. The Seder plate should be set up in line with one's custom. There are numerous ways of arranging the Seder plate. The standard method of so doing one of the standard methods of so doing is an order of the mitzvahs, so that one has it laid out so that the mitzvahs one does first are closest to one, and then as one goes through the mitzvahs, one then moves to the mitzvahs which are further away. This is the setup that the Ramah advocated. Many of those set up in the manner of the Arizal, which is structured for various mystical reasons, but each family should follow its own minhag. I'll just mention one point: the bone, the zeroah, which should be on the Seder plate, should obviously be prepared in advance. The minhag, the custom, is to use a zeroah, which is an arm, an outstretched arm. It's in memory of the zeroah netzriya, and therefore to use an arm or a leg of an animal or the like. However, as far as core halach is concerned, any bone can be used, and therefore whatever one's able to obtain, that is what one can use for the Seder night. It should have some meat on. It shouldn't just be a bone. Many just have a bone itself. It should have some meat on. The idea is that one's having roast meat on the bone, and therefore, ideally, it should have a decent quantity of meat on, not a massive amount, but a small amount of meat on, a kazayis of meat on. And after the words, one should put it away in the fridge and eat it the next day. So it should be eaten and the next day. On Seder night itself, we don't eat the bone. The bone is in memory of also the Korban Pesach, and sadly, we don't have a Korban Pesach. And mainstream Minhag Ashkenaz and many Sfardim also have this custom, is not to have any roast meat on, or roast chicken for that matter, on Pesach. One can have other roast foods, but not roast meat and roast chicken. So we can't eat the zroya on Seder night. However, one should eat it after Pesach. Other things to consider when setting up one Seder. We'll talk in detail as we go through the Seder about which points in the Seder one does lean and one doesn't lean. But basically, we lean on Seder night. And one leans on one's left, even a lefty leans on one's left. And one should actually try and make this as comfortable as possible. One shouldn't be leaning into the air, but one should lean onto something. And therefore, if you have chairs with arms on rather, then lean onto the arms of the chair. If you don't have a chair with an arm on, then prop up with a cushion or the like in order to be able to lean onto a chair, or perhaps turn the back of your chair sideways so that you can lean onto the chair. But again, this is something to think about in advance of the Seder to the best of our ability to ensure that every participant is able to lean and do so not just leaning into the air, but leaning onto an armrest or the like. And again, this is the best way to fulfill this is the correct way to fulfill the mitzvah. The reason we lean is derech bcheirus, as a way of feeling free, and therefore it's part of the halachas of Seder night, and indeed ma'akev, essential to the fulfillment of some of the mitzvahs. Other things to think about in advance, obviously ordering one's matzahs. There are different customs around which matzahs to use. I would say if one doesn't have a family custom, the best thing to use is handmade matzahs. Some people have the custom to use machine matzahs even on Seder night, but if one doesn't have a clear custom, then I would personally recommend using handmade matzahs. The basis of the mitzvah of achilas matzah is the pasuk be'erev tochlu matzahs, and the pasuk says "Shemartem es matzahs." The matzah should be guarded, made specially in order to fulfill the mitzvah of matzah. That's why we buy shmura matzahs. One can get machine shmura matzahs, and as I mentioned, one can get handmade shmura matzahs, and handmade shmura matzahs will be made by actual human beings. And if one doesn't have a custom to the contrary, then one should use handmade matzahs. And many do have the custom to the contrary, and particularly those of Yekish origin. Some were particular only to use handmade matzahs. However, if you're not aware of a family custom, I would recommend using, only use machine-made matzahs. However, if you don't have a family custom to the contrary, I would recommend using handmade matzahs for Seder night, and that's the best way to fulfill the mitzvah. Also, thinking in advance, preparing one's kosos, one's cups for Seder night, obviously ensuring one has plentiful supply of whatever one's going to drink. Different things can be used for the drinking of the Seder night. For those who are able to do so and are used to that quantity, the best way of fulfilling it is using a good quality wine, and not mavushal, and minhag is to have a red wine. However, as far as core halacha is concerned, one can use a white wine, one can use a lower alcohol wine, one can use grape juice. It's better to have grape juice and get through the night and not fall asleep or not get drunk, than to use wine and not be able to get through the mitzvah to not be able to get through the night in an appropriate manner. There is a quantity of wine that needs to be drunk, which we'll talk about when we get to Kadesh, but it's a significant amount of the cup either way, and therefore again, one should better to use grape juice mixed to in one's wine, or all grape juice if one isn't able to have all wine and successfully get through the night. But if one's able to do so and one is used to drinking wine, then having red wine is the best fulfillment of the mitzvah. But again, one should prepare about that in advance, and also think about the size of one's cup. I'm not going to go tonight into the very fascinating and interesting topic of shiurim and measures. I will simply mention over the course of running through the Seder what the ideal halachic measures are to use. People who find those measures difficult can speak to me off group, and I can discuss different measures and different quantities. However, I'm going to give the normative ones, and the normative amount of wine is 86 cc, which is a significantly sized cup, not a massive cup, but it's more than just a l'chaim glass. And ideally, one should drink the whole cup, or at least rov kos, the majority of the cup. Therefore, if you have a larger cup, ideally one should be drinking the majority of the larger cup. So it's better to have a smaller cup, which is just the shiur, just the measure of 86 cc. And that way, if one's unable to drink a lot, one can drink the majority of that cup, 44 milliliters, 44 cc, and that will be enough. So again, planning in advance, not having massive cups, and that way one can fulfill the optimal mitzvah, which is drinking the whole cup or most of the cup, rather than just drinking most of a revius, which is 44 milliliters. So those are just some things to bear in mind in preparation for the Seder and getting ready for it. I'm going to pause now before we go any further and move into actually talking about Kaddish, just to take some questions. So Simon, if you can allow people to unmute themselves if they want to ask questions. And I'm also going to look at some of the comments on the side. Okay, so someone said presumably not to lay Seder table for second Seder during first day. That is correct. Secondly, someone said that I said not to eat roast meat during the entire Pesach. I apologize for saying that. I am stand corrected. I should have said not to eat roast meat just for the Seder night itself, according to Minhag Ashkenaz. Thank you for calling me up on that. Can you use chicken wing for the bone on the Seder plate? Yes, one can use chicken wing. That's also okay. Open the box of matzahs before you start to check they aren't broken. Yes, after you buy your matzahs, check that you have at least 3 please, yes, check that you've got 3 whole ones. I was asked also privately, do I hold that women must also lean? I'll just talk about this very briefly. Again, different people have different family customs. The background to this, and I'll use this chance to share this publicly. The background is the Gemara says that women do not lean, because emas baleim aleim, the fear or awe of their husbands is on them. And the Gemara says that an isha chashuva, a chashuv woman, an important woman, does lean. Now, the poskim, the Mordechai brings, say, they talk in the Middle Ages, and they say, noshi dedon, our women are chashuvas, or chashuv, they're important, they have financial independence, they're able, they're talented, and therefore they do lean. And ever since the Middle Ages, there's been women that do lean and some women who still don't lean. Now, there's an interesting teshuvah of Ramosha Feinstein on this, in which he points out 2 things. The first thing he says is, the Gemara is simply commenting on the sociological reality. When it says, Eimat baleim aleim, the fear of their husbands is on them. The Gemara is not saying this is a good thing. The Gemara is simply saying this is the way it was. The second point Ramosha says is, when we say that noshi dedom chashuvas, that nowadays women are chashuv, don't think, he says, that means that women have changed. Realize that it's men who have changed, that at long last we are able to recognize that women are equally talented and able. And this, he says, has been a change in humanity for the better, that we are able to recognize this. And therefore, the strict halacha is that noshid zom chashuvas. Nowadays, ladies hopefully do not have emas baleim aleim. Hopefully, they are not in fear or awe of their husbands, and therefore would feel uncomfortable leaning. And therefore, the normative halacha would be that ladies should lean. However, there are those that have the practice not like that. So that was the question that was asked to me about ladies leaning. Are women obligated with the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzis Mayim? Yes, absolutely. They should be in for the Haggadah. Kittel, different people have different minhagim about kittel, so I'm not going to go into that. There are those that have the minhag, the custom to wear a kittel, those that don't. Someone wrote, under the circumstances this year, would it be okay to use machine-made, even though hand-baked are better? If you can only get machine-made, then yes. If you're able to buy handmade, I don't see why not. They were made long before the infection started spreading. Any that are in the shop now were made at the latest in January, and therefore there are no particular concerns. They're also put in the oven and get very, very hot and so on. I'm not aware of any health issues with this, in the same way as there aren't any health issues with buying catered foods from good food manufacturers. So I'm not sure about anything to do with this. I've had a number of other questions on different topics, such as how does one burn comets when living in the block of flats? What I'm going to do is I'm not going to take those questions now. Right at the end, if people have different questions that are not connected with Seder night itself, then I will take those questions. So whoever posted that question, I apologize. I'm going to put that question on hold. And right at the end, when we finish, I'll be happy to take other questions. Okay, I've read through the questions that have been written up in the chat group. If anyone wants to ask a question live, please feel free to do so. Okay, so I will carry on. It seems the group chat on the side has answered the questions. There was one more question. What about eating chicken on Pesach? Is that only a Yekish minhag? The answer is, as far as I'm aware, it's really only Yekas that have that minhag and some Yekas, and it's not obvious that we should that this minhag applies anymore. it was from a time when there were issues with chickens eating grain and so on, which is less frequent nowadays. Though my friends who work in the kashrus industry tell me there are still sometimes concerns with this. So those who have the minhag not to eat chicken can continue with that minhag, but most of us do not have this particular custom. Okay, Simon, I'm going to ask you just to mute us all again, other than myself. And I'm going to carry on now by going through the next stages in the Seder. And we start with Kadesh, which is the first one in the order of the Seder. As mentioned already, there's a minimal quantity of wine that one should drink for Kadesh, which is, well, the cup should contain 86 cc, a reviet of wine, a quarter of a lug of wine, 86 cc. One should try and drink it in one go or in a few seconds, in just a few sips, rather than delaying. And ideally, one would drink the whole kos or rove of the cup. If that's not possible, then at least the majority of a reviet, in other words, 44 cc. And as I say, if possible, to drink that in one go or more or less in one go. If not, then at least within a couple of minutes. Again, I would stress I'm giving these times and measures for regular healthy people. If you have particular health concerns, there's sometimes reasons why one can't have too much grape juice, diabetes or other such things, then please speak to me afterwards off group. But I'm just giving the standard mainstream shiurim. We only say Kaddish after nightfall, and the reason is because Kiddush on Seder night is not just Kiddush, it's also the first of part of the Haggadah itself. Kiddush itself mentions Zeicher L'Tzias Mitzrayim, and in addition, the cup of wine that we drink is one of the 4 cups, and therefore part of the mitzvahs of the night. Now, normally during the year, we make Kiddush early because we accept upon ourselves Tosefet Shabbos or Tosefet Yom Tov. We extend the Kedusha of Shabbos and Yom Tov into the weekday, and therefore are able to make Kiddush early before nightfall, because it's already the Kedusha, the sanctity of the festive day. However, even though it has the sanctity of the festive day, it isn't actually yet the night of the 15th till nightfall. And therefore the mitzvahs which are associated with Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, telling the story and drinking the 4 cups, should only be done at nightfall, and that's the reason why we only make Kiddush on Seder night at night. I've already mentioned that one should use the best quality wine one can, but equally it's acceptable to use other wine or grape juice if one won't manage to have that and get through the night. There is much discussion in the poskim about eating and drinking after making Kiddush, before Karpas, after Karpas, during Magid, and what one should do about all of that. It's okay to have some water. That's certainly okay if one needs to have some water and one's mouth gets dry during the length of the Seder. Similarly, it's okay to have a coffee if that will keep one awake. Other eating and drinking best to avoid unless one needs to do so. If one does get unusually hungry or thirsty and one's uncomfortable, then one is allowed to do that. However, the norm is not to do so. If one is going to drink, one should have in mind when one makes Kiddush that one is making a bracha b'yagofen, also to include other drinks. There are various more halachas associated with that, but that's basically a summary of eating and drinking during after having made Kiddush. If possible, someone else should pour the first cup of wine for one. That's part of the derech cherus. When one makes Kiddush, one says Shechianu, and one should have in mind for all the mitzvahs of the night. So we're saying Shechianu both on the festival, the Yom Tov of Pesach, as one would with any other Yom Tov, and also on the mitzvahs of Matzah and Moror and Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. So Shechianu is being said on all of that. And as I said, one would have in mind when making Kiddush, that is both Kiddush and the first of the 4 cups. Finally, one should lean when drinking the kos, the cup, derech cherus, through a way of freedom. It's the first of the 4 cups, first of our celebration of the freedom that we have, and therefore one should lean when drinking it. I'll move straight on to orchatz and just mention briefly that there are different minhagim about whether only the person who is running the Seder and giving out the karpas should wash their hands, or everyone should wash their hands. Either way, one washes one's hands without making a bracha, but ideally there shouldn't be an interruption between washing one's hands and then eating the karpas. We then serve the little piece of vegetable, the karpas. One should make bori pri hadama on that and intend that the bracha should also apply to the moror. And then we dip the karpas into vinegar or salt water, not into charoses. There's different customs associated with that. The different customs also associated discussed in the poskim about whether one leans or not when one has karpas. The basis of the two minhagim is karpas derech cheirut? Is it an act of freedom? It's a luxury. We're having an hors d'oeuvre, dipping it in a nice manner, and therefore one leans when one has the karpas. Or is the karpas a memory of the slavery of Egypt, particularly because we dip it in salt water, which is a memory of tears? And therefore, depending on how one conceptualize what karpas is, one either leans or doesn't lean. Different minhagim. My own family practice is to lean for karpas. Then we get to yachatz. The reason why we do yachatz is as follows. When we eat the reason, in fact, why we have 3 matzahs and we end up doing yachatz is as follows. We're trying to combine different halachic needs together, and they're not easily combined. When we get to eating the matzah, we want to do 2 things. We want to say lechem mishnah on it, because it is, of course, the lechem mishnah, the challah, if you like, of our Seder meal of Shulchan Aruch. And on the other hand, it's also fulfillment of eating the matzah, which is lechem oini, which is bread of affliction, and therefore should be made on a broken piece of matzah. So when we make hamotzi lechem and aretz and alachidas matzah, at that point in the Seder, we want to have 2 things. We want both to have 2 whole matzahs, and we also want a broken piece of matzah in order to fulfill the mitzvah of achidas matzah from lechem only, from a poor man's bread, from affliction, bread of affliction, and therefore to have a broken matzah. And as a result, we take the matzah, the middle matzah, the 3 matzahs, we leave 2 of them whole, and we break the middle matzah. And that way, when we come to achilas matzah, we're making the bracha on the matzah on 2 whole matzahs and also a broken matzah. We then eat a piece of the whole matzah in fulfillment of our lechem mishnah, and a piece of the broken matzah that's been left in between in fulfillment of the mitzvah of achilas matzah, and that's why we break the matzah, and we take the other part of the broken matzah and we put it away for afikoman. Different minhagim about whether children hide the afikoman or not. The reason for the custom for children hiding afikoman is as a way of keeping them awake. However, it's possible that this minhag is based on a mistranslation. The afikoman is referred to as sofun, that which is hidden away and put away. It's in memory of the Korban Pesach. The Korban Pesach used to be slaughtered and roasted before a Pesach, and then eaten on Seder night. And because it's Kodesh, it's holy, it's a Korban, it had to be put away somewhere safe in order to ensure that it wouldn't become tomei and contaminated. And therefore, in memory of that, we put away the afikoman into somewhere safe. As a result, the perhaps better minhag is, and this is the minhag we practice in our family, is that the adult hides the afikoman, and that way they put it somewhere safe, and the children try and hunt for it, and that keeps them nicely occupied, and also fulfills the mitzvah of sofun, of hiding the afikoman somewhere safe in memory of the Korban Pesach that used to be put somewhere safe. So that's yachatz. We take the 3 matzahs, we break the middle one, and that way we're fulfilling the mitzvah of making our lechem mishnah much later in the Seder, both on whole matzahs and broken matzahs. I'll just pause for a moment because I see there's some questions that are coming up. Yeah, may one drink, for example, during Magid between the Arba Kosas? Yes, as I just explained, yes, one can drink then if one needs to do so. Could I comment on light grape juice with reduced sugar for those who have health issues? Yes. So with light grape juice, that's absolutely fine. Just check that it isn't light because it's been watered down. But if it's light just because they have used a method which reduces the sugar content, then that's absolutely fine. There's also, by the way, low alcohol wine. Now, low alcohol wine can be made with 2 methods. It can either be made because they simply mix wine and grape juice together. In that case, there's no reason to spend extra money on low alcohol wine, and all they're doing is mixing wine and grape juice, which you can do yourself. And from a halachic point of view, it's simply a mixture of wine and grape juice, which has the disadvantage of not being all wine, and all wine is better for the mitzvah, but equally it'll ensure that you're able to get through the night without getting drunk or overtired. There are light wines on the market, however, in which they've stopped the fermentation process before too much sugar gets converted to alcohol. And those light wines seem to achieve both purposes. They're pure wine, but they're low alcohol, and therefore they are options, but you should check the ladle. Can you use 2 random broken pieces for lechem only and afikoman to save whole matzahs for the next meal? If you're short of whole matzahs, yes, you can, but ideally, yachatz should be that you take a whole matzah and break it into half, and through that, you're showing that this is lechem only. Okay, we will move on, and I'm going to talk now about Maggid. Actually, before I do so, I'll just pause, and Simon, if you give people the option to unmute if anyone wants to ask any questions, unless you've already done so by chat. Okay, we'll go on. We now get to Maggid. Maggid is the central part of the Seder. It's the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. I'll just mention a few points about this. The first point is we do not lean during Maggid. Maggid is meant to be done in a focused manner, and therefore we don't lean during Maggid. There are 2 ways of doing Maggid. Either everyone can say the Haggadah, the whole Haggadah for themselves, or if there's several participants and one wishes to do so, you can have different participants saying different pieces, and they can be motzi each other through Shemea Ka'ona, through listening to what is being said, and that is also a way through which one can fulfill Maggid, and that's an acceptable practice. Many have the practice of different people saying the Haggadah. It's important, by the way, to understand the meaning of the Haggadah, very, very important. It's a mitzvah sipur. We're meant to be telling over the story of the Haggadah, and therefore there's no point saying it in Hebrew if one doesn't understand what one is saying. It's a broader discussion about tefillah and prayer when one doesn't understand the words, but certainly when it comes to the Haggadah, it's Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, one needs to be telling over the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and therefore one needs to make sure that one understands it, and therefore it would be right and appropriate to translate the Haggadah if one is unsure about what it means, or to use a Haggadah with an English translation and read along in English to check that one's understanding it. The essential parts of the Haggadah, the most important passages, if one's going to make sure that at least one understands those, are Avodim Hayinu, the description of our slavery, the central part of our Haggadah, which describes the historical development from idol worship to becoming the chosen people, which I mentioned already, Mitzchila Ovdei Avodah Zarah, and the list of the 10 plagues and the statement of Rabban Gamliel towards the ends of Maggid. Those are the parts which are particularly important to understand when one is telling over the Haggadah. Maybe I'll just say a couple of other points over here. One central part of the Haggadah that's a little hard to understand, and I'll just talk about that for a few moments, is the paragraph that begins with Yochol Mi Rosh Chodesh. And I'll just comment on that very briefly. This is a paragraph which dates back, it's one of the oldest parts of the Haggadah, it's a Mishnah. It dates back to the time of the Mishnah. And in it, it says that we may have thought that the mitzvahs of Pesach, of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, begin from Rosh Chodesh, because as we know from the Parsha of Chodesh Hazeh Lochem, the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh, which, please God, we will celebrate tonight and tomorrow, was the very first mitzvah given to the Jewish people. And therefore, in terms of spiritual freedom, that is when their spiritual freedom occurred, is the very first bit of Torah that they were taught by Moshe, by Hashem, and the first time they were given mitzvahs as a nation, the first national mitzvah. And therefore, we would have thought that that was the beginning of Yetzias Mitzrayim. That was the time when Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Exodus, actually took place on a spiritual level, particularly, as we said, according to the opinion that we are discussing Matchil Begnut U'Masayim B'Shvach. We're talking about the spiritual experience of starting off as idol worshippers and then becoming spiritually free. And therefore, this paragraph says that we would have thought that the mitzvah started on Chodesh, but no, they don't. They start on the 15th. But then it carries on and it says, Yochel mi b'od yom. We would have thought that the mitzvahs apply during the daytime. Tamud loma ba'avor zeh. Sorry, I should have, before that, I should have proceeded. How do we know it only starts on the 15th? Because it says, V'gadol levincha ba'yom ha'ulema. We should tell the mitzvah of Sipur is in the day. But then we may think it's in the daytime, not nighttime. The pasuk says, "Ba'avor zeh." The mitzvah Sipur should be said when we have b'shashish matzah mora menachem fanecha, at the time when we have the mitzvah matzah and mora, which we know is at nighttime. So here comes out something very interesting. The pasuk tells us we should do the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim b'yom, in the day, b'yomo, on that day, and nonetheless we learn out from the fact that we should say it in the presence of matzah and mora that the mitzvah is done at nighttime. Now, this is built upon the fact that the Hebrew language Yom can mean two things. It can mean day, or it can mean a 24-hour block, a whole day, a 24-hour block, and therefore also include the nighttime. Nonetheless, it's difficult that the Pasuk tells us to do the mitzvah in the day, by Yom, and then we need to learn out from the presence of Matzah Morah that the mitzvah is only fulfilled when we have the mitzvah of Matzah Morah at nighttime, and therefore the mitzvah is done at night. And the answer to this question is that it brings out another unique feature of Seder night, which is on Seder night, the night behaves like day. Nowhere else in the Torah do we find mitzvahs which are unique to the nighttime. Normally, the celebration of a Yom Tov is in the day. So Rosh Hashanah is the day of the shofar, but we blow the shofar in the day, not in the night. Sukkot is the time of Lulav and Esrog, and we do that in the day, not in the night. Seder night, the main mitzvahs of the Chag HaMatzahs are done in nighttime rather than in daytime. In addition, we say Hallel at night, when normally we only say Hallel in the day, and so on and so forth. Now, in Nirtzah, in the songs that we sing at the end, we refer to, eventually we want Ya'ir Kiyom Laila. We daven for the time of Mashiach, when the night will be lit up like day. And this is a central theme of Seder night, that this is a night time which is referred to in the Torah as a day. And again, the idea behind this is that in the presence of Matzah and Morah, night becomes day. And this brings us back to the concept I started with, that it's not enough to celebrate Yetzias Mitzrayim by saying we were slaves and now we're free. That was an awful time, but now we've gone free and it's no longer awful. The concept of Geula, of redemption, doesn't just mean that forward in time we're now free. The time was awful, the past was terrible, but going forward it's okay. The concept of redemption is that it frees the past in the same way as it frees the future. It redeems the past in the same way as it redeems the future. Meaning to say we're only redeemed when we understand why that which happened in the past was also for the good. Because otherwise, why are we celebrating? We went through these terrible experiences, these terrible times, they've come to an end. Okay, thank God for that. There's nothing positive in that. We still had the negative experiences. True Geula, a Geula like Yetzias Mitzrayim, means that we're able to look back on the past and we're able to say that was also for the good. So in the presence of Matzah and Morah, the night becomes day. In the presence of Matzah and Morah, if we really fulfill Yetzias Mitzrayim, we celebrate not just the redemption, but also the slavery itself. How can we celebrate slavery? How can something so awful and terrible be a positive? The answer is we have the ability to make it positive. That's what Geula teaches us. With the ability of saying it was worth it because it made us into the people we are. The tough times were worth it because through that we became ex-slaves, and ex-slaves, as we explained, are those who are able to empathize and look after those who are weak and vulnerable. Ex-slaves are those who recognize that there's Hashem, which is the foundation of our existence. And therefore the concept of Bavor, this little paragraph of Yochel Mirish Chodesh Talmud Lomim Bayom, Yochel Mibod Yom, etc., that the mitzvahs of Pesach are referred to as daytime mitzvahs, is teaching us this idea that we're meant to be doing, we're meant to recognize the essential unity of the Golus and the Geula. These aren't two separate experiences. Golus, exile, horrible and negative, and the Geula, redemption and positive. No, quite the contrary. The Golus is also part of the Geula. The negative is also elevated to the redemption process and becomes something which is good. So this is the mitzvah of Magid. This is the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, which we've spoken about. When we get to Rochta, it's important to do some advanced planning and to make sure that all the participants are keyed into what's going to happen. Because basically in Rochta, we're going to wash our hands, and then we're going to make the bracha on the mitzvah of eating matzah and hamotzi lechem and oretz, give out the portions and let everyone eat the matzah, which we'll explain in a few moments. We're then going to have the moror, and then we're going to have the kurach, the hillel sandwich, in which we eat the matzah and moror together. Now, when we get up to kurach, we're going to speak about why we eat them together and what's going on. But basically, we fulfill the mitzvah of eating matzah twice. Once by eating itself, and then once by eating it together with the moror in kurach. Which means to say that ideally one shouldn't speak about anything irrelevant or side, all the way from washing our hands through to having finished the hillel sandwich. Now, obviously, if there are essential things, passing the matzah around and making sure people have their portions and know what's doing, one can speak. But ideally speaking, we want to run through all of this with as little delay as possible. Why? Because we've made the bracha on the mitzvah al achilas matzah, and we're now going to go through and only eat the matzah straight away, the first portion of matzah, and then eat the second portion of matzah much later at the time of kurach. So it's important to brief people in advance and make sure that everyone around the Seder understands what's going to be happening and how this will all work. It's also appropriate if one's by oneself, only with a couple of people, one will have enough matzah and maror on the Seder plate to give out from the matzah that you're about to break to everyone. However, if one has a larger Seder, it's appropriate to give out to everyone a portion of matzah sufficient for their needs in advance, so that it's already been given out. And then the person running the Seder will make the bracha on achilas matzah and hamotzi lachem and aretz, give out a small amount of matzah from the portion on their Seder plate, and everyone else will then begin eating their portion. So in brief, advanced planning means making sure people know what's going to be happening, so that they can be prepared all the way through from the mitzvahs of matzah, maror, and karach, number one. And number two, if need be, already giving in advance out the portions of matzah from the box, which one will then just top up with a small piece of matzah from the Seder plate. So this is rochza and the preparation that needs to be done in advance of rochza. Motzi matzah, as we explained already, one makes the bracha of motzi holding all three matzahs, the two whole ones and the broken one in the middle, because one's saying lechem mishnah, and then one puts down the bottom matzah, which won't be used at this stage yet, and one says al achilas matzah on the broken matzah, on the two matzahs, because that's what one's going to use for the fulfillment of one's achilas matzah, the whole matzah at the top, which is one's lechem mishnah, and the middle broken matzah in the middle, which is for lechem only, is the symbolic broken poor man's bread. And one would then eat the matzah in a speedy manner, if possible in 2 minutes, if not 4 minutes, or if need be in 9 minutes. Now, I mentioned already the issue of shiurim and quantity of matzahs that should be eaten. I'm not going to go into the whole controversial issue of shiurim, which is a very complicated matter about where the measures come from and why we use such a large kazayit, such a large olive size, and the various debates around this issue. That's not a topic for tonight. For tonight, I'll just say on a practical level, for one who is healthy and well, one should ideally have of 25 grams of matzah for one's first lot of matzah, and then after that, for the sandwich and for afikoman, one can have smaller measures of about 15 grams. Now, these are just estimates. The matzah is a volume, really, measures in Torah given in volumes, not in weights, but this is a weight that gives one a little bit of a way of working out how much it is. There's a very easy way to work out the weights of your matzahs, which is look at the amount on the box. If it's a kilogram box, count how many matzahs in it and then divide it. And that way you can tell what amount of your matzah is approximately this weight of 25 grams. But for the first portion of matzah, which is a mitzvah in HaTorah, is a Torah mitzvah, it's correct, if possible, to use that standard of kazayis. Again, for those who will struggle with this from a health perspective or whatever, please speak to me off group. But that's the standard amount that should be eaten of matzah, and that's the fulfillment of the mitzvah, say, of matzah. Maror, I'll just talk very briefly about maror. There's different types of maror that people use. The best maror is really lettuce, romaine lettuce, or chicory. The reason lettuce is good is because it's in line with the original custom of maror, which is something which is not super bitter when eaten normally, but as a maror gets lettuce, starts off sweet and then gets bitterer, in line with the symbolism of the story of the slavery in Egypt, which started off sweet and then got more bitter. Ideally, one shouldn't use iceberg lettuce, though if need be, one can do the mitzvah with that. One should be careful what one's buying is lettuce, at least. A Chinese leaf, for example, which is often marketed as a lettuce, is actually a cabbage, and therefore isn't a fulfillment of the mitzvah. And ideally, horseradish also shouldn't be used for one's main mitzvah of maror. You can use horseradish if you wish for other things, or to top up your kurach, your sandwich. However, it's a non-ideal form of the mitzvah of maror. It used to be used in Europe because they couldn't get fresh lettuce. However, horseradish is more sharp than bitter, and it's bitterness, which is the translation of maror, rather than sharpness, and therefore it's not the ideal form of maror. And again, one should give out portions in advance of the lettuce, and then just take a little bit off the Seder plate. Normally, there's not much on the Seder plate, so just take a very small amount off the Seder plate to use for one's actual maror. In terms of quantity of maror, if one's using a thin leaf like a lettuce, it should be spread out the leaves. It should be something like 20 centimeters by 20 centimeters or something like that, which is not far off an A4 sheet of paper of spread out leaves. There's not a vast quantity of leaf when you've got a thin leaf like a morrow. If it's chicory or something like that, then obviously it's much less because it's a much thicker leaf. But that's again the ideal quantity for doing the mitzvah of morrow. I'll comment briefly on charoses. Charoses is, according to one opinion, a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. The morrow should be dipped in charoses, just a small quantity. There's two reasons we do charoses. One is in memory of the mortar. Not being a builder, I don't know quite what mortar is, but it's apparently the material that's used for making bricks. And it's in memory of that, the material that's used for the bricks. The custom is that we use nuts in it, apples. The reason for using apples is because there's a medrash that talks about the women in Mitzrayim giving birth under the tapuach, under the apple tree. Though probably the grammarians and experts amongst us will know that tapuach actually probably doesn't mean an apple. It probably refers to some other round fruit. But nonetheless, it's become commonly translated as an apple, and therefore many have the custom to use an apple. People use egozim, nuts, because egoz is one of the symbols used for the Jewish people. It's got this hard shell outside, but when you crack it open, inside is this delicious fruit, a bit like the sabra metaphor nowadays used in modern Israel to refer to the Israelis. And also we mix in it cinnamon or ginger. And the reason this is, these are sort of stringy vegetables, which are reminders of the straw that was used to make the bricks in Egypt. The charoses mixture should be fairly thick, much like mortar is, or so I'm told. But one should add in enough grape juice or wine to it so that one can dip in it, that it's a mixture that can be dipped into it rather than it just being solid. So it shouldn't be too runny and it shouldn't be too thick. And that way one can dip into it, but should still be of a thicker texture such that it can be used for charoses. And that's what one will use for one's morah and one's charoses. I'll pause now again and just take some time for questions. And then, oh, actually, let me just mention one more thing before I take questions, and then I'll pause. Two more things, actually. The first is, as mentioned, there is a mitzvah to eat morrow on Seder night. Nowadays, it's only drabanan, because the pasuk says on matzah somorrow yichlu, the common Pesach should be eaten with matzah on morrow. And since we don't have a common Pesach, we don't have the mitzvah of morrow, even though we still have a mitzvah of matzah, because that's an independent mitzvah. Very important, if one hasn't got ready checked lettuce, to check it. Bugs can be found on lettuce. There are different methods of doing it, but the simplest method is separating each leaf, unfolding it and inspecting it in front of a light. Others have the alternative method of separating the leaves and soaking it in salty water for a few minutes, and then removing the leaves carefully and then checking the water to see if there's any insects floating in it. For that, one should use a white bowl or a transparent bowl with perhaps a white plate underneath so one will be able to spot insects. But it's important to check the lettuce and not, God forbid, end up eating bugs along with one's lettuce. I'll stop there about morrow, and again, just look at the chat, and also if anyone wants to ask questions, Simon, so that you can unmute them. Someone asked me to remind them about the four most important parts of the Haggadah. They were Avodim Hayinu, the 10 plagues, and Rabban Gamliel, and the description of Mitzchila Ovda Avodah Zarah, the story of the idol worship. If a participant is eating their own special matzah for dietary reasons, e.g. gluten-free and so on, do they need their own set of 3 matzahs? Not necessarily, because the person who's making the Seder and being motzi them, exempting them on the brachas, can do so, can still do that. Do we eat morah on its own at any point, or we do straight away dip it in charoses and then eat it with kurach, and then eat it? The answer is we don't eat morah by itself. We straight away dip it in the charoses. That's how we do morah. Later, we're going to eat the morah in the sandwich together with the matzah, and that will be the mitzvah of kurach. Is it acceptable if a child under bar mitzvah age reads part of Maggid? Ideally, an adult should read the whole of Maggid because they are being motzi one. If a child is reading, then best if you just read along in an undertone yourself. Someone else asked me, just to confirm, one needs 2 kazesim, even if one's only eating a small piece of the balabai's matzah and topping it up from the box. I'm not going to go into too much detail to answer that question because it's a little technical, but the answer is no. Since one's eating, the one making the Seder is eating from the matzah on the Seder plate and giving out to everyone else. Therefore, there's no reason to have two gazetim. I'm not going to go into the technicalities of why one might think that there are. That's a separate issue. But just to summarize, the person who is running the Seder will eat a kazayas made up of the pieces off the Seder plate and can give out the remaining pieces to the participants who can then top up from the box. I've been texted here that not sure that the visual inspection of leaves is enough on its own. The salt water, soap water releases the grip on the insects on the leaf. I will double check that. So I'll check if I've given the right advice about cleaning that, and I will get back to the person who wrote that. Yeah, someone's just put a link here to the KLBD bug guide. So everyone, you can, after this share is over, you can look on the chat group, and there's a link there to the way to check for bugs from KLBD, which is there. A couple of people have put in the group that chicory does not require checking. That is correct. I was talking about lettuce, and I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear. Okay, does anyone want to ask any questions loud? Otherwise, I will continue.
So what can be used for chometz? What can be used for morah?
Yeah, so for morah, the ideal is to use a lettuce or chicory, romaine lettuce or chicory. Otherwise, one can use, as I said, there's, if need be, if I'm stuck, one can use iceberg and horseradish also, but the ideal is lettuce or chicory.
I forgot, what do you use for karpas?
Karpas,
I know it's earlier.
As halacha is concerned, any vegetable can be used. Different people have different minhagim, potatoes or parsnip or parsley, these sorts of things, or carrots, but different, as far as halacha is concerned, any vegetable can be used. As far as I can tell on the KLBD guide, if each individual leaf is separated and inspected in front of a light, no washing is needed. I've been asked here, is it acceptable to have different people read the sections of Maggid if they are not observant? Again, the basic answer to that question is yes. I'll take it off group if there's any particular circumstances one is talking about. The basic answer is yes, different people can read Maggid, but I don't really want to discuss that on general terms. I'm happy to discuss it on a case-by-case basis. Okay, Simon, we can remute everyone and I'll carry on. Korach, as mentioned, in Korach we fulfill the mitzvah of eating matzah and morah together a second time, and for that reason, really, till one's finished Korach, one should avoid delays, because the brach you've made on alachilat matzah and on alachilas morah are brachas on both the fulfillment of eating matzah and morah separately, which we first do, and the fulfillment of eating them together, which is the view of Hillel. Hillel was of the opinion that matzah and morah and Pesach in the good old days should all be eaten together, and therefore one should avoid interruptions as much as possible till one's eaten all these portions together. Since this is a second eating of matzah and morah, one can use smaller portions of matzah and morah. 15 grams would be enough for that of matzah, and a smaller corresponding amount of morah can be used for that, since it's the second fulfillment of the mitzvah. The word korach means a wrap, because of course they used to use soft matzahs in those days. So it was literally like a shawarma. There was roast meat, which was the carbon pesach, the morah, and the soft matzah, which was wrapped around it. Sfardim still to this day use soft matzah, but in the Ashkenazi world we've moved to hard matzah. Again, a topic of another shir about why that switch has been made. Under normal circumstances, an Ashkenazi should stick to our hard matzahs because they're much thinner than the Sephardi matzahs, and the Ashkenazim are strict to have thin matzahs. However, if someone has difficulty swallowing, it is perfectly acceptable to use soft matzahs made with a reliable Sephardi hechsher. Hillel is of the view that they should be eaten together, probably in line with the general theme of the Seder. He learns it out from the Pasuk, which says, Al matzah and riachlu, the carbon pesach should be eaten together with the matzah and morah. But the idea behind it is probably connected with the general theme of the Seder, which we've been discussing until now, which is that the carbon pesach, which symbolizes the freedom, the morah, which symbolizes the slavery, are eaten together, wrapped in the matzah, which symbolizes both. we took the same symbol, the matzah, which was the symbol of slavery, and we converted it and changed it into the symbol of freedom, that we left Egypt in a rush. And that's the double reason given for the achilas matzah. And we wrap the Pesach, which symbolizes freedom, and the Morah, which symbolizes slavery, together to symbolize that they are one and the same, as we explained, that in celebrating at Siyas Mitzrayim, we recognize that even the slavery was part of the good, and that is the mitzvah of Korach. Shulchan Aruch, the meal, as we've already mentioned, one shouldn't have roasted or even pot roasted meat or poultry. Some have the custom to eat an egg dipped in salt water. There's different views about leaning in the meal. My personal family minhag is that we lean during the meal. The meal is part of derech cheirus, it's part of the celebration. It's not just that we happen to have a meal during the Seder, but it's part of the Seder procedure, derech cheirus, that we eat like kings. It's appropriate, therefore, that the meal should be also in line with the theme of the Seder, and use it as an opportunity for further Divrei Torah and further discussion around the themes of the Seder. One should make sure, however, that one has some room left to eat the afikoman al hasova. The afikoman should be eaten when one is reasonably full, but not to the bursting point, in memory of the way the Korban Pesach, which was eaten at that stage. The afikoman itself should be eaten leaning, because it's in memory of the Korban Pesach, and ideally, if possible, the afikoman, one should get to the afikoman point before chatzos, before midnight, halachic midnight, which is 1:02 this year. If one's got a very lengthy Seder and one isn't able to do so, one should at least make sure that one's eaten the first portion of matzah by chatzot. Better to eat the afikoman by chatzos also, and many try and finish the Seder at that point. But if one has a very active Seder, that may not be possible, in which case one should at least try and eat the first portion of afikoman by chatzos. Borich, I won't comment on, other than one should hold one's cup for the benching, and because the brechas hamazon in a festive meal, in the olden days, people used to say the whole of benching always over a cup. Nowadays, we only do those for festive meals, but we're benching over the cup, and therefore one would hold one's cup of wine for the brechas hamazon, and that's the mitzvah of brechas hamazon. And then we come on to Hallel. Hallel on Seder night is a takonas hanavim. It's a minhag instituted from the times of the prophets. It's a very old minhag to say Hallel. As mentioned, it's part of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, because since we're reliving the experience, Chayav Adam Liris Esatzmo Ki'ilu Hu Yotzim Mitzrayim, we're meant to see ourselves as if we have left Egypt. Therefore, it's part of the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. Unusually, it's said at night. It's the only occasion we say at night, and unusually it's said sitting down. However, not leaning, since it is psukim from Nach, and therefore we give it honor by not leaning. Many have the minhag to open the door during Shofar Chamascha as a symbol of Leil Shemurim, that tonight is a day when we expect redemption, we're waiting for Eliyahu Hanavi, and therefore we open it up to symbolize that we have trust in Hashem. Whilst saying Hallel, one can do it as one does it in shul, in other words, led responsively by a leader, where one person says Hodu, then we all respond Hodu, then one person says the next line of Hodu, Yom Anah, and then that's responded to by everyone by Hallel and so on, and one can do it in a manner in which we are yotza those verses by Shemei HaKa'ona, by listening to the leader reading it, rather than reading those particular verses themselves. Looking at my notes, and forgive me for this, I realize I forgot to mention one thing, going back to the end of Magid, before Matzah, before the second cup of wine, which is at the end of Magid, we say the bracha, Asher Ga'alonu, which is the bracha on the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, and also a bracha of praise to Hashem. And then we straight away go into drinking the cup of wine. So there shouldn't be an interruption again between the bracha of Asher Ga'alonu and drinking the cup of wine. Unusually, we say the bracha on the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim after the mitzvah, not before the mitzvah. Normally, we say brachas before mitzvahs rather than after mitzvahs, but here we say the bracha after the mitzvah. And there are several reasons given for this, but one reason is because any mitzvah associated with becoming tahor, becoming pure, we say the bracha after the mitzvah. So, for example, when we wash our hands from the Tilat Yadayim, we say the bracha after the mitzvah rather than before the mitzvah. And similarly here, we've relived the experience of leaving Egypt. At the beginning of the night, we were slaves in Egypt. We've now finished Magid, and we've come out of Egypt. Therefore, at that point, we say the bracha on the mitzvah of Magid, having emerged into freedom. But from a halachic point of view, as mentioned, after saying that bracha, the bracha of Asher Ga'alanu, right at the end of Magid, before we drink the second cup of wine, that bracha is being said on the wine together with Bori Priyagofen, and therefore there shouldn't be an interruption. Finally, I'll conclude. Actually, I'll stop there just if there's any questions anyone wants to ask, and then we'll conclude this. Okay, someone said that I said that you should eat the first portion of afikoman before chatzos, and it said it wasn't clear what I was saying. So again, just to emphasize, there's only one portion of afikoman which we eat after the meal, at the end of the meal. Ideally, that should be eaten before chatzot, before midnight. If one can't get up to there, then at least one should eat the first portion of matzah, the matzah portion before the meal, before midnight. I was asked here what should be done regarding Eliyahu's cup. There are different customs about when to pour it. In my wife's family, and this is a custom we've adopted, there's the minhag that they have the cup there at the center of the Seder table, and they fill it up a little bit, a quarter, each time they fill up a cup until it's filled up completely after benching. There's different minhagim around this, but the mainstream minhag is to fill it at shafoich chamascha. After the cup is eaten, after the Seder is finished, the cup should be carefully put in the fridge and should be used for kiddush or drunk the next day. It can't be drunk that night because we don't have extra food or drink after the afikoman. Then one can, after the afikoman, have some water if one's thirsty, but one shouldn't have other food or drink besides that. I was asked about the measure for the afikoman, how much one should use for afikoman. There's for various technical reasons, if possible, one should have the larger portion of 25 grams, but if one is struggling, one can have 15 grams for that. One can have the smaller amount. Again, I'm not going to go into the technical reasons about why that is, but if possible, 25. If not, then 15 grams. There are no more questions on the chat. Does anyone want to ask anything live? Okay, so we'll go on, and we'll just finish with Nirtzah. Nirtzah is the section of praises said at the end of the Haggadah. One of the interesting themes in Nirtzah is this sort of repetitive refrain song in which we always go back to the beginning. So we sort of repeat the verses, Echel Miyodea, and when we get to number 12, we go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, etc. Or Chad Gadya, we always go back to the beginning. And it would appear that this is in line with the theme of Yetzias Mitzrayim, in which after an event happens, we revisit the event that happened first and re-understand it in light of the later event. That's the whole concept of what we've been speaking about, that the exile, the Goddess, is re-looked at and reframed by going through the Geula experience. After Nirtzah, the custom is that one does not say the whole of Kriyat Shema Mitzvah, one just says the bracha of Hamapil. If one davens Mariv before Nacht, then one should say Shema again, and that should be before Chatzos. In addition, on the second night of Seder, one should say the Omer, and one should count the Omer, and one should make sure again that one does that before Chatzos. That's the better time of counting the Omer, though if one has missed Chatzot, one can count afterwards still with a blessing, with a bracha. And that brings us to the end of Nirtzah, and I've just been asked over here, may one brush one's teeth after afikoman? Yes, one can do so. One shouldn't eat, which is the symbolism of leaving the taste of afikoman lingering, but one can brush one's teeth. Should one do Omer before Seder? If one is by oneself or is scared one will forget, one should do so before Seder. Otherwise, one can do so during the Seder. Especially if one knows one will get to the afikoman on time, one can do it at the point in afikoman when it's printed in the Seder. I was asked, is it okay to sing Nirtzah during the meal as Zemiros, or does it have to be at the end? The truth is, Nirtzah is custom, is minhag, and therefore minhag should generally be kept. But if there's a particular reason why one wants to sing it early on, one can. And then for Nirtzah, one can just sing Lashon Haba rather than singing the rest of all the songs. And I will conclude with the tefillah, Lashon Haba, B'Yerushalayim Habniyah. Please God, we should all be able to celebrate in good health our Seder next year or even this year in Yerushalayim, Lashon Haba, B'Yerushalayim Habniyah. I'm going to go off group now, unless there's any questions that people want to ask via the audio, and I'm happy to take questions also off group if anyone wants to email me or WhatsApp me about any of the issues that have been raised. So I'll just wait a minute if there are any audio questions. Otherwise, I wish all of you good health, and we should all share a healthy and happy Pesach, please God, together.
Thank you, Rabbi, and Shkoach.
Amen.
Thank you very much. Okay, good night, everyone. Bye-bye.